giluwas ug gipahiuli.
Inyong mabati matag adlaw Sabado ug Domingo alas 8 ngadto sa alas 9 sa kagabion.
Ang pinili nga nasod giluwas ug gipahiuli.
Dinhi lamang sa RPN Radio Ronda Dipolog City.
Mas pinalawak, mas pinalakas. RPN sa iba't ibang mga lalawigan. DZRL Bataan, DZBS Baguio, DZKI Iriga, DYKB Bacolod, DYKC Cebu, DXKS Surigao, DXKD Dipolo, DXKO Cagayan de Oro, DXKT Davao, DXKP Pagadian, DXXX Zamboanga, DXDX General Santos.
RPN Radio Philippines Network, DXKD Dipolo Radio Ronda, member kapisanan ng mga broadcaster ng Pilipinas.
Sa ngalan sa Amahan, sa Anak, sa Dios, sa Balaang Espiritu Santo. Amahan namo nga anak ka sa mga langit, pagabalaan namo ang imong ngalan, paanhia ang imong kingharian, pagabuhaton unta namo ang imong kabubot-on dinhi sa yuta, mayngon man ngadto sa langit. O hatagi kami karon sa pagkaon namo sa matag adlaw, o pasaylua kami sa among mga utang, maingon nga kami nakapasaylo man sa mga nagkautang diha kanamo. O ayaw kami itugyan ngadto sa mga panulay, hinunoa ilikay mo kami gikan sa mga kadautan, kay imo man ang gingharian, ang gahom ug ang himaya hangtod sa kahangturan. Bathala ala Ja Yavasua Yahweh Adonai Elohim, Yeshua Apo Asug, Apo Bagulang, Apo Gumulang, Apo Uha, Apo Uha, Apo Uha, Apo Aha. God Lord, Havang Dios, Jesus Christ, Señor Jesus Emmanuel, Santo Papa Menestro Paulino Onggoy Z Agapay, Yavasua Yeshua Elohim, sa ngalan sa Amahan, sa Inahan, sa Anak, sa Dios, sa Balaang Espiritu Santo. Amen.
Okay, Luzon, Visayas ug Mindanao, kutob sa moabot sa among makusog nga programa. Brothers and sisters, kaninyong tanan, maayong gabi. Nya atong pagtahod ug pagpasalamat kanunay sa atong labaw nga makagahom nga diin sa kanunay kapiskay kabaskog kahimsog kusog kalabsik sa atong mga panglawas, kalinaw katinaw sa atong mga panghuna-huna. Grasya ug panalangin material kun inespirituhanon iya nang gibubuog yapod-apod nganhi sa matag usa kanato. Busa ang Salmo 113:3 nagaingon diha ang maong pulong gikan sa pagsilang sa adlaw hangtod sa pagsalop niini pagadaygo nato ang ngalan ni Jehova. Nya tungod pa gyud sa ihang dakong gugmangan hi kanato, ihang gipadala ang ihang bugtong anak aron ang tanan nga mosalig kaniya dili gayud malaglag kundili makabaton sa kinabuhing dayon. Unya sa pagpahiuli na mga kaigsunan sa ihang gingharian sa Mateo 21 bersikulo 43 nagaingon dito ang maong pulong. Busa sultihan ko kamo nga ang gingharian sa Dios pagkakuhaon gikan kaninyo ug igabalhin sa usa ka nasod nga nagapamunga sa mga bunga niini. Sa pagpahiuli ng mga kaigsuonan sa Isaiah 62 bersikulo 2, si Ginoong Hesukristo nagdala na sa bagong ngalan nga gihinganlan mismo sa baba sa Amahan. Unya sa pinadayag 3:12 nagdeklara ug nagadmitado si Ginoong Hesukristo nga siya dunay usa ka bag-ong ngalan. Gipamatud-an sa balaang espiritu sa Juan 15 bersikulo 26, ingon nga kami mao'y saksi niini sa Isaias 43 bersikulo 10, ang bag-ong ngalan ni Ginoong Hesukristo way laing among gipamatuod kanunay sa inyo ha. Bag-ong ngalan Halangdong Menestro Santo Papa Paulino Ungkoy Zamora Agapay. Mga kaigsunan, ani ana usab ang programa sa ang piniling nga nasud giluwas ug ipahiuli. Panggobyerno sa Dios nga nagsugod na sa pagmando or God's government begins its rule. Nga ang katuyuan niini mao ang kalinaw ug kahusay ingon nga mo'y lagda sa tanang mga iglesia sa mga balaan. Matod pa sa unang Korinto 14:33, kay ang Dios dili Dios sa kasamo kundi sa kalinaw ug kahusay. Nya ato pong itunol ang pagtahod nato ug pagtimbaya sa mga nagdumala ning atong estasyon RPNDXKD kaninyong tanan maayong pagpaminaw ug maayong gabi. Kumusta mga kaigsunan kaganina sa Calamba, Misamis Occidental, 98.6 DXMM FM sa dial sa inyohang mga radyo. Unya ang nakaangkor niini mao si Brad Charlie Kabatuan, nakaapil pa mo si ilahang ginagmay nga pa premyo jackpot prize nagkantidad og 1,000 pesos. Unya ang oras niini alas 11 kaganina angtud alas 12. Usa ka tawra ang ihang kuhaon dito mga kaigsunan nagkantidad og 1,000 hinaot nakadaog mo diha mga igsoon. Dili lang kay diha lang sa Ipil si Bugay Sambusor 103.1 FM sa dial sa inyong mga radyo. Unya ang nakaangkor niini mao si Brother Junior Supuso. Unya ang takna pud niini alauna hangtod alas 2 sa hapon. Do na lang gihapon nay pa premyo nga ginahimo tulo ka tawo ang ilahang kuhaon mga kaigsunan. So makapailin-ilin mo ug asa mo pwede makadaog mga kaigsunan. Unya dili kay diha lang mga kaigsunan sa RMN DXDR nakahook up pud ni sa DYRB Cebu o sa DXPR Pagadian City. Unya ang oras pud niini mga igsuon alas 5 hangtod alas 7 kaganina mga kaigsunan. Unya nindot kay ni ilaha diha mga igsuon kay dunay jackpot prize 1,000 pesos kuhaon ang pangutana sa wala pay mensahero. Then kung di pud mo kadaog sa 1,000 do na sila'y tinag 500 nga nagasunod. Unya sayon ra kay ang pangutana kay kuhaon sa unang magwawali mga kaigsunan. So makapailin gyud mo ug asa mo pwede makadaog. Nya mga igsuon ato pud usab ituno lang atong pagtimbaya sa atong mga kaigsuonan nga naa sa gawas. Kay Merlan Akama sa United Kingdom, Mercy Anyag sa Florida, USA, Mina Balawag sa New York, Nieves Arocha sa Poland, Teresita Roda sa Canada, Sister Eva Agapay sa Bahrain, and also to Melvin Cornell na karon sila sa USA. Kumusta na mo diha? Amping mo kanunay sa inyong pagpanikay-sikay. Unya sa mga naka-tune in sa ilahang radio 105.3 AM band, sa mga nag-monitor nato sa internet live ta sa Facebook o sa YouTube, i-type lang o i-click ang RPN DXKD Dipolog City. Unya sa mga kapatid po natin dyan sa Luzon, sa walang sawang pagsubaybay at pagsuporta nyo po sa ating programa, sa inyo pong lahat dyan, magandang gabi. Unya ang pulong sa Ginoo mga kaigsunan nag-ingon diha sa Salmo 48 versikulo 3, ang Dios nagpaila sa ihang kaugalingon sa mga palasyo niini nga maoy dalang panan mga kaigsunan. Duyog ni ana ang Isaiah 55 versikulo 6 nagaingon didto ang maong pulong, pangitaa si Jehovah samtang siya makaplagan pa, sangpita siya samtang siya anaa pa sa duol. Kay sa Isaiah 45 versikulo 15 nagaingon didto gihapon ang maong pulong mga kaigsuonan, ikaw maoy Dios nga nagatago sa imong kaugalingon. Busa nagpapangita siya mga kaigsuonan. Maunang kamo ayaw gyud mo pag makuli sa pag-abri sa inyong Biblia. Magbasa gyud mo kanunay Biblia mga kaigsunan aron di gyud ta malipat-lipat sa mga maayo kaayong mensahero nga kanang sa kuan Mateo 23 bersikulo 3 nagaingon diha ang pulong, sunda og tumanan ninyo ang ilahang gisulti, ayaw pagsunda ang ilahang gibuhat kay sila maayo lang mo sulti apan dili mo buhat. Para dili ta malipat-lipat sa mga maayong mensahero nga dili tinuod, magbasa gyud tag Biblia aron kita mismo maoy makapamatuod kung unsa ka tinuod ang mga magwawali nga nagsulti lamang sa pulong apan dili mo buhat mga kaigsunan. Unya sa ngalan na lang sa kinatibuk ang puwersa sa ang pinili nga nasud giluwas ug ipahiuli sa among inahan sa iglesia kay Mamaliling Agapay kaninyong tanan maayong gabi. And for this time mga igsoon, let us give this to our first and the last speaker, Brother George. This is your time and you may start now.
Thank you very much, sister. I appreciate you giving me all this time. It's a good thing because I have a lot to talk about. I wanted to discuss something I read in the New what we call the New Testament, the Christian Testament, and something from the Old Testament. Now, something which disturbed me greatly, in the Gospel according to St. John, this would be, let's see, chapter 8, I think. Yes, chapter 8. Jesus talks with the Pharisees. It's not the first time. He talked to them in Matthew, and we can go back to that. But what he says here is much more serious. It is so serious that for me it disturbed me. I'll just read it. This is verse 42, chapter 8. Jesus said to the Pharisees, "If God were your father, you would love me. For I have come here from God. I have not come on my own. God sent me. Why is my language not clear to you?" And before he even gives them a chance to answer that question, he answers it in his own way. He says, "Because you are unable to hear what I say." And here's the disturbing part. He says to them, "You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Yet because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Can any of you prove me guilty of sin? If I am telling the truth, why don't you believe me? Whoever belongs to God hears what God says. The reason you do not hear is that you do not belong to God." These are the Pharisees. Who were the Pharisees? Well, there are the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and other groups of priests in Judaism 2,000 years ago and before that. The Pharisees are the most holy, the most sacred, the most important of all the priests. They are the highest of the high priests. Why? To be a Pharisee, you had to be related directly to the line of Abraham. You cannot just go to school and become a Pharisee, a seminary or whatever. You have to be born a Pharisee. So these people were almost untouchable. They were beloved by their people. The Jewish people went to them if they had a problem, as one goes to a psychologist in other countries. They knew the Bible back to inside out, the Old Testament, of course. And yet, here comes somebody, a Jewish man, who accuses them, without any proof whatsoever, of being the sons of Satan. And he does not say why. Even in Matthew, and I can go back, he calls them hypocrites. All right, a hypocrite. They put on fine clothes on the Sabbath so that everybody sees that they go to the temple. Well, everybody knows that Pharisees go to the temple. They're the priests. They command the service of the temple. Big deal. But to say that they are the sons of Satan, what is going on here? I never knew, of course, I never knew Jesus is 2,000 years ago. I didn't know Santo Papa Paulino Agapai either. I wish I had. But I know this. Firstly, they are the same person. Secondly, they are the kindest. Together, the kindest man on earth is the Son of God. This is a man who brings life to a dead person, sight to someone who is blind. He tells his disciples, "You want to follow me? Then give all you have to the poor." Meanwhile, He was a carpenter's apprentice and then stepson. He made tables and chairs, and I'm sure he gave almost all profit to poor people. The widow's mite, you remember that? In the temple on a Sabbath. Rich people went in, they gave thousands of, in today's currency, millions maybe of pesos. Then this poor woman came in with a tiny coin, and she put it in the box for the poor. And Jesus said, this woman with this act is assured a place in heaven. She has given everything she has, while the rich gave a tiny portion of what they have. No, he loved poor people. I personally cannot believe that the Son of God would accuse anybody of being the son of Satan. That is such a terrible accusation, and without any proof. And whatever happened to redemption and forgiveness or even explanation? He doesn't give them a chance, not one tiny chance, to repudiate what he is saying. This is no longer Jesus, this is somebody else. Somebody wrote this, in my opinion, because they listened to Satan. In many cases in the New Testament, not the Old, but in the New Testament, there are cases where it is obvious to me. A scribe of some type, and don't forget the New Testament was written in a language of the pagans, Greek. It was translated and mistranslated hundreds of times over 2,000 years. And Satan had a lot of opportunity during that time to insert his influence, shall we say, into the Bible. As of now, for the first time, and hopefully the last, we now have satanic worship introduced in God's word, in the Bible. Satanic worship. No, Jesus never said this. Santo Papa never said this. This was introduced by somebody else. Maybe in the Middle Ages, a monk or somebody, a scribe, was seduced by a prostitute who was in the employ of Satan and wrote down these words. But can you imagine the Son of God, who is so forgiving, so loving, and he is Jewish? Why would he accuse his own people, the highest of the high priests, of such a thing, of being the sons of Satan? No chance for forgiveness, no explanation. He doesn't give them a chance. It starts out in Matthew, as was pointed out to me earlier by Brother Douglas. I can read a little because it's an introduction, as it were. You can feel the anger in Jesus against the Pharisees from Matthew all the way into John, the Gospel according to St. John. In Matthew, for example, he says, and this is chapter, 23, verse 33. Can you imagine Jesus saying this to the highest of the high priests, or to anybody, to you, to me? Jesus Christ said, "You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? Therefore I am sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. Well, he's, as we would say, judge, jury, and executioner. He's made his decision. That's it. These people are the sons of Satan. They are brood of vipers. I am going to try. I'll send them teachers and prophets, but they will kill them or whip them. He's telling them that. He's not asking. He's not giving them a chance. There's no democracy here. One thing that Jesus, Santo Papa, was known for was being a democrat, being a listener. And what about forgiveness? What was so terrible that these Pharisees did that they deserve to be called the sons of Satan and to be condemned to hell for eternity? What did they murder people? What did they do? Steal all the gold in the synagogue in Jerusalem? No, he gives no explanation. Again, judge, jury, executioner. That's it. It's dictatorial. This is not Jesus. This is not Santo Papa. This is something else. Someone else. I'd love to know, and I'm sure I'm going to get some bad press for this, but that's fine. Send me your comments. What do you think? Please read the Gospel according to St. John, chapter 8, verses 42 through, let's say, 47. What do you think? Could Jesus have said this? Was he just having a bad day? No. Throughout the Bible, and we can go to Job. Job is a good example. Jesus himself is another good example in the New Testament, in Job. And this is the second time that Satan appears, or gets involved, shall we say, with mankind. The first time was Eve. With Job, Job does not know anything about the conversation between God and Satan. God merely says to Satan, have you met my faithful friend, Job? More faithful than anyone else. Satan takes this as a challenge and says, don't worry, I'm going to have him curse you. God says, how are you going to do that? Satan says, let me. He has to say let me because he is under God's thumb. God has complete control over Satan. He sends Satan to test and tempt. That's his job. But in the end, it's God's decision. God says to him, fine, what are you going to do? Satan says, I will take everything from him, all his land, and he has a lot of it, rich man, all his family, his gold, his silver, his cows, his camels, everything. Then we'll see if he still loves you. Okay? God says, do it, but don't touch his body. Satan says, of course not. He does it. And Job still loved God. Never cursed him. Not once. So then Satan goes to God and says, all right, so I underestimated him. However, let me attack his body. I will give him more pain than any human being can possibly stand. And we will see if he still loves you and worships you. God said, do it, but do not kill him. Now, of course, death. Satan doesn't want Job to die, not until he worships Satan. So, Satan attacks Job's body, gives him more hell than he can possibly stand. And he still loves God. The only thing he says is, I wish I had never been born. That is not cursing God. That is a perfect human reaction. So in the end, Satan fails. We go back to the Pharisees. What does it mean to be a son of Satan? This is what Satan wanted Job to be. This is what Satan wanted Jesus to be in the desert. If you remember the 3 temptations, actually there were 2 tests and 1 temptation. The last one being Satan taking Jesus up into the clouds so he could see the whole planet Earth. He says to him, look, I will give you this planet. You will be the emperor of the whole planet. Gold, silver, cows, women, whatever you want. All I ask is for you to bow down. You don't even need to get on your knees. Just bow a little bit and worship me. That's what Satan wants. Jesus, of course, says, get thee behind me. Leave. Go. Sons of Satan. These are devils who followed Satan out of heaven to hell. Yet, we're talking here about the highest of the high priests. I was discussing this with Brother Douglas. There is something called the Sanhedrin. Exists even today. The Sanhedrin, it's interesting. In Judaism, there is a high court, a supreme court, consisting of 72 Pharisees. But this court also makes laws. It doesn't just enforce them. Very, very important. These are people who are entrusted by all Jews everywhere in the world to make laws and to enforce them. And these were people who were directly related to Abraham. And all their lives, they carried out priestly duties in the temple. They were not rich. What did they do that was that earned them the designation of son of Satan? Well, I'd love to hear what you have to say. Now, just to change the subject a little more lighthearted, let's go to the Old Testament, something completely different. There is a prophet called Hosea, not Isaiah, Hosea, Hosea. Hosea was spoken to by God, as usual, as with Ezekiel. The Israelite people started to go backwards. They started to worship idols, the golden calf, Baal, whatever, prostitutes in temples and so forth. They seemed to do this whenever a prophet was not around. They needed a lot of discipline. All right. God spoke with this man, Hosea, who lived about 700 years before Jesus was born. So 700 BC, thereabouts. And I'll find what I think is rather revolutionary in the Bible. Let's see, 806. Until Hosea, belief in God was everything. Faith in God was everything. You hear evangelists in Texas saying, you must believe in the Son of God, and so forth. Suddenly God speaks to Hosea. No more faith, no more belief. Another word is used. I know it almost by heart anyway. Yes. In Hosea, chapters 3 and 4, God introduces the concept of acknowledgement of God, knowing God, being close to Him, not belief, not faith. These are wishy-washy words, and I've mentioned this before. I can say, oh, I believe that President Duterte is having dinner right now. Well, you would say, you believe? Well, why? Well, it's, I don't know, what's the time, 9 o'clock or so? Big deal. So it's 9 o'clock. There's no reason why he would have dinner now. Prove it. I take out my cell phone and I switch on WhatsApp. There's President Duterte having dinner with his family. And he says, hello, George. He waves at me. That's proof. That's acknowledgement. Now I know, and you know, that President Duterte is having dinner right now. This is the concept of acknowledgement. We'll talk about David and Goliath because David went even further. God is trying to persuade the Israelites to think differently for a change. Not just to believe or to have faith, but to say, I know that there is one living God, and only one. And I know that these idols are made of wood, metal, silver, gold. They are worthless. They are not gods. In Isaiah, God makes fun of idol worshippers. He says, look, a carpenter takes a big piece of wood, cuts it in half. He makes a beautiful idol out of what? He spends hours, days making this beautiful idol, and he sells it or puts it on his mantelpiece to worship. What does he do with the other half? Well, he puts it in the fire to warm his hands and to cook. Well, what happens to that piece of wood? The piece of wood burns. How can it be God? And God says to the carpenter, wait a minute. It's the same piece of wood. You made a beautiful idol of one half. The other half is disappearing in flame. It is being destroyed. How can it be God? I am God, he says. I am invisible for a reason. I am eternal. I am infinite. I was never born. I will never die. And I am everywhere at the same time. And I created the whole of reality from absolutely nothing. Let me read. Acknowledgement. Chapter 4 of Hosea. Hear the word of the Lord, you Israelites, because the Lord has a charge to bring against you who live in the land. There is no faithfulness, no love, no acknowledgement of God in the land. There is only cursing, lying, and murder, stealing and adultery. First time, I think, in the whole Bible, the word acknowledgement of God, what does it mean? It means to know that there is one God, to know without any doubt, no doubts. I don't believe that President Duterte is having, I know he is having, I can prove it, I know it. That's what knowledge is extraordinarily strong. when you talk about God. And God keeps emphasizing this. The same chapter 4, verse 6. My people are destroyed from lack of knowledge. Because you have neglected knowledge, I also reject you as my priests. This is what God says to the Israelites. So now he's using the word knowledge 3 times in just a few verses. Chapter 5, next page. Verse 4, their deeds do not permit them to return to their God. God says to the Israelites, a spirit of prostitution is in their heart. They do not acknowledge the Lord. Israel's arrogance testifies against them. Now this is 4th time. Chapter 6, verse 3. Evidently at this point, Hosea has spoken to the Israelites, and many of them have started to listen and have come back to God, have deserted their idols. They say to him, let us acknowledge the Lord. Let us press on to acknowledge him. As surely as the sun rises, he will appear. Now this is very powerful. This is what knowledge is. I know in the Philippines right now it's, what is the time? 9 o'clock or so, 9:15 at night. Question to you. Will there be daylight tomorrow, or will it be night for the next 2 months in the Philippines? I think you know the answer. Tomorrow the sun will rise. It may rain, there may be a tsunami or two, but it will be daytime. It will be, surely, definitely. I acknowledge that. This is the same amount of what we call certitude, certainty. As surely as the sun rises. God is trying his best to impress upon his chosen people, his prized possession, as he calls the Israelites, that belief in him, faith in him, mean nothing if they do not acknowledge that he even exists. Then, lastly, and by this time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6th time acknowledgement is mentioned in chapter 6 of Hosea. There is another mini revolution, if you will. Until this point in Israelite history, God permitted the Israelites to make sacrifices to him, as long as they were to him. Why? Because they started out being idol worshippers, and idol worshippers make sacrifices to their little idols. So at least he was trying to make things easier for them. He has now lost patience. No more sacrifices. And he says just that. Hosea chapter 6, verse 6. For I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. This says it all. Until this point in Israelite history, if you wanted something from God, you took a lamb, a little lamb, that was the usual sacrifice. You brought it to the temple. The priest had a special knife. He cut the lamb's throat. The lamb's blood poured into a special golden cup. And the body was then taken to another part of the temple and burned. This was sacrifice. At that point then, the person who owned the lamb, had owned the lamb, and the priest together prayed to God and said, all right. The priest said, look, dear Lord, this man has offered a sacrifice. He would like you to please make it rain for the next 2 weeks so that his crops will flourish. For example, you give something to God, you expect something back. Not anymore. Not anymore. With Hosea,
Okay, excuse me, brother. Don't forget your topic. Let us give the question for the good listeners. Excuse me for a while.
certainly.
Okay. Okay mga kaigsunan, kung nakatusunod mo sa mga kapitulo o bersikulo nga ihang gibuhian, sanglit do naman siya i-Bible nga English diri mga kaigsunan, pero dili kay ko kakita kay sanglit pino kayo ang ihang litra. Basahon na lang ka siguro nako ni sa Binisaya kay nakasabot mo putos, nakasabot mo sigurado sa mga kapitulo o bersikulo nga ihang gibuhian. Kining pulo nga asa man ka nato ni pwede makaplagan sa Biblia. Dito ni sa ihang gisaysay ka ganina mga kaigsunan sa mga kapitulo o bersikulo nga ihang gibuhian. Kinsa ba kaninyo ay makapamatuod nga ako nakahimog sala kung nagasulti man ako sa kamatuoran nganong dili man kamo mutuo kanako. I-send lang ang inyong tubag sa 0946-249-5249. Okay, brother, you may now continue.
Very good.
Okay.
Are there any questions for me? Or
No.
comments,
No,
anything? All right.
no.
And again,
It's okay.
don't be shy. If you have any comments, negative as you wish, especially about my first reading of the New Testament, the Pharisees being accused of being the sons of Satan by Jesus, please bring it on. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Yes, just to finish this, with Hosea, God tells the Israelite people through the prophet Hosea, look, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Mercy is an old-fashioned word. It means kindness. So God prefers it, evidently, if the Israelites are kind to each other. He no longer wants the little lamb in the temple with the knife and the blood and then burning it as a sacrifice. If you are kind to each other, then God will consider giving you what you want. But sacrifices are out, finished. This is, I would say, practically revolutionary in Israelite history. A great reason for having a temple was sacrifice. There was an altar, a special altar. Everything was set up. And this came from the pagan world of idolatry. And God permitted this for a while. But when the Israelite people started to go back to worshipping idols, God lost his patience and said, enough. Let's cut my world, the world of God, from the world of idols completely. I don't want anything in common with that world, not even the idea of sacrifice. Sacrifice and burning the offering afterwards. I want kindness. Be kind to each other. Then you will reap the rewards. So, I'd like to know also what you think of this. Today, there is no temple. There were two. One under David and one under Solomon, I believe, his son. and there were sacrifices. It is said that when the Messiah comes, and we can go into that a little bit, the Messiah, which just means someone who is anointed, as in this case, a leader of his people, a king, related to David. At that point, the world will be perfect. People will love each other. No more war. The lamb and the lion will sleep together. Can you imagine that? This is going to happen maybe in a few thousand years' time. And a little boy will be born related to King David. His name will also be David. In Hebrew, this is what's called the Mashiach, the Messiah, the anointed one, but a special anointed one. At that point, there will be the day of judgment, when God comes to earth and decides who goes to heaven with him and who goes to hell with the devil. On the day of judgment, I find it impossible to believe that God will look at all the Pharisees, and there were hundreds. When Jesus spoke to the Pharisees, he looked at a lump sum. He didn't say, well, a few of you are the sons of Satan. No, all. I can't believe that God, in his beneficence and kindness, will come to earth, look at the highest of the high priests related to Abraham, his own chosen people, and say, you are the sons of Satan. You go to hell. Nah. But, again, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. I still have a few minutes.
Yes.
Um,
You will take your time.
Wonderful. So, I like, delving into the Old Testament and the New Testament, completely different works. The Old Testament, of course, is the history of the Israelite people with their prophets and their relationship to God. Their relationship meaning they are the chosen people. Chosen meaning chosen by God to be the first of those who are close to him. And their reward for this is that they will inherit a piece of land called the Promised Land, which originally was Canaan. They had to fight for it a lot, die for it a lot. New Testament, completely different. Centers around one man who is the Son of God on his father's side. On his mother's side, as Jesus says many times, I am the Son of Man. Only the Son of Man. He says this to Ezekiel also. But it's important to understand what this man was all about. The Son of God. What kind of man? He heals sick people. He brings life to people who are dead. He gives sight to those who are blind. He cures leprosy. Who can do this? This is amazing. One day, there was a crowd all around him, His reputation was by that time very clear. People wanted to get to know him. Hundreds and hundreds of people were crowding around him, and he suddenly said, I believe it was to St. Matthew, "Who touched me?" Matthew said, "My Lord, there are 100 people here. He said, oh no, somebody touched me in a very special way. A woman touched me who believed in me, believed that I'm the Son of God. She accepted this. She wanted nothing from me except to tell me this through her touch." He turned and saw a little lady, old lady, and he said to her, "Yes, you have touched me. Let me touch you, and all will be well." From that day forth, they say, she became younger and stronger. When Jesus talks about rich people and poor people, another of his disciples, I think Simon Peter, asked him, "Lord, will rich men go to heaven?" He asked this question because in the Jewish church, you could buy yourself in those days into heaven. You paid the priest money, your sins were forgiven, you go to heaven. Jesus said, "No, not for me. That won't happen for me. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle." You know, when you sew fabric with a needle, there's a little hole in the needle through which the fabric is pulled. That's called the eye. It's easier for a camel, it's a big animal, to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to go to heaven. That's what Jesus thinks of rich people. So I don't want to belabor this too much. I've already said my piece. But is this the kind of person who would accuse anybody of being a son of the most evil one? To be a son of Satan means you yourself are totally, unbelievably evil. You're a murderer, a thief, a liar, whatever. And yet, he's a high priest, the highest of the high. Did I mention the Sanhedrin? 72 Pharisees. The Sanhedrin is a combination of the Supreme Court and the legislature of the Jewish people. They make laws and they enforce laws. 72 men, Pharisees, all, and they are entrusted by the Jewish people for thousands of years, thousands, since Abraham. At one point, if I go back to St. John, they wanted to stone, the Pharisees wanted to stone Jesus. Stoning was illegal by the Sanhedrin. Capital punishment, killing, is against a commandment. You don't do it. The Romans can do it. That's why they went to Pontius Pilate. Let him do it. He can crucify, he can kill. He's Roman, he's pagan. Jewish people are above that. Anyway, sorry if I'm getting a little emotional, but No. These are not the words of the Son of God. Just as when apparently he said, Lord, why have you forsaken me? Why have you deserted me? His very last words in 2 of the 4 Gospels. Thank God, the 3rd Gospel, St. Luke, has very different words in Jesus' mouth. Gospel according to St. Luke, the last words of Jesus were, and this is after he's been tortured by the Romans, nailed to the cross, he's about to die, he says, Lord, into your hands I commend my soul. These are the words one would expect of the Son of God. Perfect. I love that. Luke. John is a little more objective, a little strange. According to St. John, the last words of Jesus were 3 words. Very simple, cold words. It is finished. What does that mean? Again, the New Testament language is Greek, the language of pagans, idol worshippers, translated and no doubt mistranslated thousands of times over 2,000 years. Still, it is finished is a lot better than, Lord, why have you forsaken me? In the Old Testament, God says to the Israelite people, I will never forsake you, no matter what. Never. In Deuteronomy, in Psalms, he says this. Jesus was a Jew. He went to Sunday school. He knew these things. He could not have said what he was apparently said in Matthew and Mark. God, why have you forsaken? There's no way. I'm going to go through more in the New Testament. I have a feeling that there are parts of the New Testament which I'm going to have to disagree with in terms of whether the Son of God could have said or done a certain thing. Remember, we talked about David and Goliath, one of my favorites. But it's one of my favorites because of what David did not say. And I mention this because of acknowledgement of God. Hosea. David lived and died about 300 years before Hosea was born. All right. Lot of conversation between David and Goliath, which ended in the following manner. Goliath says, look, little boy, you're 17 years old, I'm, 45? You've never killed anyone. I've killed thousands. I trained these people behind me, 150,000 Philistines. I trained them to kill very successfully. In battle, as a champion, or in real battle, I have never even been wounded. Do you know what they call me, the Philistines? They call me God. I have everything. I have a sword, I have dagger, I have a helmet. You have a sheepskin and a little toy which I don't even recognize. You have nothing.